fast, oh, the red light, got it.
For the afternoon, we'll give you the picture, Karen. And we'll get me a drop.
I'm trying to stay hydrated.
Never mind.
We just wanna let you know, Chief, these mics are not actually working, in case you, yeah.
Just distracting.
We're just letting, I'm just
Props
letting
that are in the
everybody
way
know.
of our binders.
It's just right on our camera, and it's taking a picture of everybody at the same time.
So, welcome Chief Sylvester, Captain Giorgio, happy to have you here. And, this is our first opportunity to see this, so what would you like to draw our attention to?
So if we're following the format we usually do, we usually start with revenues, and then we can talk about capital projects, and then we'll get into our operational lines, if that's.
Sounds good.
All right, so we wanna go line by line?
We're not
There's There's not a whole, on the whole, there's not a whole lot of change from our budget year over year. There's a couple of things that'll have minor increases that are really called upon by either policy changes at the state level, equipment that's no longer in use that needs to be replaced. But operationally, there's not a whole lot of change in here. So, starting with our prisoner transports, this year our revenue appears to be relatively close to on pace, and that number is, it takes some time for those payments to get caught up from the county. We're gonna have to watch closely as to what happens next year with criminal justice reform. We're not sure that we're necessarily gonna have as many prisoner transports because of the generally elimination of bail. That said, if one person is remanded, then the transport still takes place. So something that we'll watch closely, but a little bit hard to predict right now. In terms of those photocopy fees, there's obviously a very large uptick in that this year. That's attributed to this year, as we discussed at a legislative session much earlier on. We started a program with LexisNexis that allows us to generate some revenue from accident reports being sold. They're still available free of charge for those that email us or come into headquarters, but for those that want it on demand at times when records is closed, they have the option to do that. Generally, that revenue is coming through insurance companies. I don't know how many have actually been sold to individual consumers, but it's something the insurance companies were doing already. It simply created a revenue stream for that there. So something that we'll see continuing into next year, and it'll be a larger stream because it'll be a full year at that point. That's only a partial. So fees for photographs, that really is based on requests that we get, and as of now, I don't believe that we've had any requests for photographs this year. It's mostly foil stuff. Taxi cab inspections, we're pretty close to being on pace for where they're supposed to be this year.
What page are you on, I'm sorry?
I'm on page 1 of 2 for revenues.
Gifts, fines.
No.
Oh,
I'm up the hill from there.
Oh, I went way past me,
Yep.
sorry.
So fingerprint fees really vary from year to year. We only offer ink fingerprinting right now, and that's gonna come up as a topic under our capital plan. I believe there were a few recently, so there should be some revenue coming in from that shortly. But as you can see from prior years, it's hit and miss. Most businesses are now only accepting digital fingerprints, so it's sort of a thing of the past, but occasionally someone in an education industry will come in asking for fingerprints, and it's a service that we provide. Alarm billing, we budgeted $1,000 for that as revenue. We're at $300 right now, I believe. Do they go out later, Tom, or is that backed up where we still have some coming in? The alarm billing, false alarms. It's not billed out of my
The
office.
false alarms are billed, I guess, throughout the year as it becomes a chargeable,
Okay.
excessive number of false alarms.
So we're filing the paperwork, but the billing's not done through our office.
And just to clarify for anybody watching, if an alarm goes off legitimately, then there's no charge for it. It's if the system is not.
Correct,
It's
so
being tripped regularly.
if there's a legitimate reason for an alarm, there is no charge, but according to the code, after a certain number of either malfunctions that could have been prevented by maintenance or things tripped by homeowners that require a response from police and fire, there does at some point become a fine associated with that.
Except for the community.
Moving on to the next line. Other public safety, Tom, can you just remind me that 3936, is that the vest reimbursement?
Yes.
Okay, so 3936, you can see there's a 0 there. That is our revenue line that comes from, we have a grant that comes from the federal government for reimbursement, 50% of our body armor that comes in. So that varies year over year on how many we're buying, and that program isn't every year. Thankfully, it appears that we should be eligible for it again next year. We got it this year, but in past years, the funds had dried up, so not planned for, but it's there. For parking meters, we're looking at the revenue there, and we're fairly close to being on track for where we were in the past. One of the reasons that we see that go down, we've talked about this before, is as we continue to look at parking meters to be replaced, we're trying to be as efficient as possible in terms of how much we're spending to replace broken existing meters without overspending on that. But obviously, we take a little bit of a ding to revenue when some of those meters go down, so.
So why are we budgeting 85,000 when we know we're not gonna make it?
Because I think that we can.
But you just said, understandably, that it's actually going down and you haven't been the last 2 years,
So this year
would you
we're,
budget just for a smaller,
this year, I expect that if we're at 61,000 now, I think we were doing some math earlier, we're projecting out to, somewhere north of 75,000 for the rest of the year, give or take. And some of that also depends on whether the board chooses in a given year to waive meters for the few weeks at the end of the year. We didn't do that last year. Last year, we had a much longer period of the meters being, of a number of meters being down, which hit our revenue harder. So, I don't know if we'll make 85,000 this year, but we'll be much closer than we were last year.
well, I'm sure this doesn't affect the overall number, but it just always
Right.
seems weird to me that you would, on this part versus expenses, you would aim higher than.
Well, I think that, why am I talking like this?
Why are they here?
That's why I was trying to be polite and say,
I know.
we're not working,
It's just
but
like a,
Habit, yeah.
it's there.
So, one of the things that we really want to accomplish next year, and it's been on the list of things we want to accomplish for the last few years, is a new parking metering system. So if that happens, even if it happens later in the year, our ability to exceed $85,000. So I still think if we're looking and we go forward with this, that's a conservative revenue estimate.
Okay.
Because if we change metering, and again, things take time, but that is something, in terms of lost revenue, we should be prioritizing. So I do think that that'll give us incentive to make sure that we're there and then we hopefully exceed that revenue goal.
And just you passed it, and just for my own edification, because these budget meetings, as Victoria said, is not just about the dollars. Could somebody explain to me how you guys do the taxi cutout inspections, please? I'm just not aware of how that works. I see the revenue line, I'm not asking about the numbers.
So the taxi cab inspection line specifically is that they, in addition to a New York State
Mhm.
inspection, they have to go to a licensed garage in the village who's going through a process to be approved. So, I think that the Shell station on South High, and there might be one, and I believe Unicio's also are the only two that are, that participate in this program. They have a separate safety inspection they have to get done annually. So that's separate from in order for them to renew their taxi cab license each year for the car,
Right.
they have to have a safety inspection done first that's, more stringent than the New York State, emissions test.
And there's like some decal that goes on the windshield, so people listening to this today will know, oh,
No,
they
what
passed
happens,
the
what happens is
inspection.
that they bring back their inspection form stamped and signed by the garage, and then that's required in order for them to get the decal. So in other words, their medallion as it exists,
right,
that indicates that they passed the inspection because we have the receipt from the inspection. So if you don't pass the inspection, you can't get the medallion. So there's not a separate ticket for, we do one sticker. There's not a separate sticker for inspection and for the medallion.
And do you know, and I mean, this is very detailed, but I think 2-3 weeks ago, I don't remember who it was on the board, mentioned that in certain cases now, was it you, Pontel, I don't remember, but that there's a certain year, like, if it's over the next number of years, they really can't pass the inspection. Do you know if that's the case?
I don't believe so.
We
No,
got
there's
the-
no.
Oh, you did?
we were
You
talking
got
about
the
over.
answer?
We're talking about the year of the
Yeah,
car, how long can it be?
There's no requirement for the age of the car, and I don't know how you necessarily do that. I think that your indication has to be much more in terms of the safety of the vehicle, because,
I'm not arguing that point, I'm
Right.
just asking.
no, I don't believe that, I'm looking at.
So it's a
Donovan,
stricter
it doesn't
inspection that you
Sorry.
would get for your own car at a
Correct.
regular place to get your state, and and that's how you know, and you can't get a license if you don't get that.
And without,
Or
if
permit.
without that inspection, they would not get the medallion that goes on the back window.
Got it,
Now,
thank you.
Chief, you only, besides these two shops that they do go through the inspection of the cars, you also do the inspections on the vehicle as well for the signage, the letters.
Yes, so when they come in for the renewal day, which we plan like a big day with the clerk's office so that we can try and knock out as many as possible in a single instance. when they come in, Sergeant Don will actually go outside and make sure that they have appropriately, lettered vehicles, because part of the code says that they have to have 3-inch lettering.
Yeah, it's
Oh, I see.
dimensions.
So like we've sent people back when they come in with 1-inch lettering on the door and said, I'm sorry, the code says 3, you have to have 3-inch because it has to be visible from a distance to identify it as a taxi. And that if somebody has an issue, they have to be able to know that that's what company it is.
Okay.
Can they put a magnet?
No. They had, I believe according to the code, I'll go back and check that it has to be permanent lettering. Moving on.
Okay,
It-
more? Yeah, I
So
stopped
the-
you, go ahead.
No, it's all right. There's a marked increase in the IMA for, police services to the town. That's, reflective of the contract, so that's gonna go up over the next 3 years, in accordance with that contract. That accounts for, newly hired officers moving up in step and, contractual obligations we have in terms of raises and such. So that's a contractual number there. So fines and forfeitures, we're budgeting 485, we're at 286 now. If I'm not mistaken, Tom, is that backdated? That's got.
That
money coming
is
due.
through July.
That's through July.
So
Oh, okay.
then we're on
I was
target.
gonna
We're
say.
likely on
We're
target.
really low.
So what are the fines on forfeitures? Like, what actually makes that up, what fines over time?
These are parking.
Parking tickets
Parking
mostly.
Just parking.
It's only parking.
Yeah.
So gifts and donations are, from time to time we get stuff, I don't recall what the larger numbers were in the past year. But the $100 was a resident who really appreciated service and wanted to contribute to some item that we might need, and that's where the $100 came from. We don't expect that from anybody, so we don't put a projection out on that one, but, awfully nice when people do try and help us.
Procedurally, and maybe this is a stupid question, but I don't know, $100 may not cross a threshold, but when we accept a donation, a lot of
67
stuff.
something. It's definitely not $100.
No, there's,
Oh, that's
that's a different thing.
That's a gift for us to make sure we're not
Okay,
being
yeah.
bribed,
Right.
to somebody for a dinner or something.
I don't
Um,
recall the standard, I know that we had ran that by Stuart, and we talked to Tom about how it
The
gets into
$100,
line. Yeah,
okay.
the
All right.
$100 was legal, yes.
Right. Cause obviously when, whatever the 6,100 and the 50,000, I'm sure the boards at that time, I would have.
No,
included
those
us,
weren't
but
gifts. Tom, do you recall what that 50,000 was that ended up in that gift line?
For, the Maple House, I think. Maple, Snow,
That was a,
Maple House pilot impact fee.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
so that was part of a much bigger
Yeah, and
legal process.
what happened is when I separated these out, was in order to get the revenues under the actual specific departments, I had to go back and retool all these accounts, which I did, but unfortunately it then also brings the history with it. So, he's inheriting the history of that, it will drop off next year.
So while we love our residents, there's nobody giving us 50,000
No.
or 6,000.
Sorry.
But one person did send $100 one time, and it was really good. We really appreciate it. It's
Every year you seem to get $100.
it's very nice. And then obviously the interfund revenue swaps. That's more of a Tom and Karen thing.
We've discussed that, I
Yeah.
think, today.
yeah,
Yep.
that's the alarm monitoring.
So the last couple things on the back that you'll see there's state aid for public safety, that's our traffic grants, and that funds some of our traffic enforcement stuff. It's generally there to reimburse overtime that's spent, so that's where those revenues come from. The other $4,000 that we're budgeting there is, as you'll see later when we get into our equipment line, we're expecting $4,000 for next year in revenue from our grant for the Ballistic Fest. That would represent 50% of what we're expecting to spend.
Okay.
Good, capital projects?
I just, before we get to that, we're skipping past all of the personnel, where are you with, your numbers right now?
You wanna
And
do
what
that?
are you anticipating for 2020?
Do you wanna do that next, or?
Come on, it's just next.
Okay, so we can do
That's-
expenditures.
yeah, that's-
Sure, okay. All right, so our personnel line, there's a bit of an increase there. Right now, there's nothing accounted for as the collective bargaining agreement is ended. So traditionally, what we do is we'll budget for salaries as they are, and then there'll have to be some accounting for it if there's an increase in salary after that's done. Right now, we are at 60 officers, we're budgeted for 61, so on page 2 of 15, I believe it is, you can see there's one vacancy, it says first year TBD, so we're gonna budget for that as a brand new, as a new hire. And in terms of staffing for next year, there's a number of staff members that are eligible for retirement, though obviously very difficult to decide, or to decipher who's planning on doing what, where and when. So, there's a lot of opportunity that we could have turnover, but it's also very possible that all of those folks stay on, and we're grateful for their service. In terms of, so a big one for us is always, the 101 line, so overtime, if you look at that there, we are nearly maxed out this year. and I think there's a conversation to be had about that. So, we're not asking for an increase in that line, although I've asked that when the contract is settled, that line should reflect that increase also, because otherwise it's a cut if the rate goes up and the number stays the same. The reason that line is so high right now, that we're, nearly at the end of that, at 85% of the way through the payrolls, is that we've had a number of line of duty injuries as well as vacancies that we held for most of the year. So we've gone over this with a fine tooth comb, and it appears that 31,200 should have a nearly identical amount of excess at the end of this year to match the, we should have surplus in 31,200 that should match the overage from 31,2101. So all of that should balance out.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Here, please? Again, not looking at the micro, just stepping up for decisions that we have to make and educating ourselves. Has someone looked at the dollars spent in overtime for all the parades and events that go through this community?
Yeah, I've given that to the board periodically, not recently, but yes, we have.
It's-
So when we break down
It's all included in here, but I would just like to have that separated out.
So Captain Giorgio does an overtime analysis every month, and the things that we break it down, there's 19 categories?
Yeah.
Somewhere between, varying years, somewhere between 17 and 3,000 categories of ways you can earn overtime. But things that we do is we'll account for how much of it is attributed to sick time, how much of it, we'll divvy it up as municipal events and non-municipal events. So
Okay.
we could go a little deeper and say how many were attributed to religious processions for a particular organization, but right now we just keep it to municipal and non-municipal. So we have, we take a look at it each month to see how much we spent on that, how much is that tying into the
What
year.
is a municipal one? Can you give me an example?
The village fair, the fireworks, the fireman's parade, anything that's municipally sponsored.
All up for debate, and we have a large conversation.
Yes, I'm just trying to understand how.
Well,
to
it's-
categorize it.
It's not
No,
a,
I want to hear from that.
yeah,
I
it's
know
not, for us,
categorized.
there's no legal context as far as what's municipal versus non.
Understood,
Yeah, if it's something that the village is sponsoring for our purposes, we consider that a municipal event.
okay.
Non-municipal would be anything that's a private organization that comes in and does, and, so that's how we do it. So yes, to answer your question, we do look at that every single month, and, so we'll keep a tally so that we can run it, and that's sort of how we month to month look at where we're spending money, and, there is a bit of a bell curve that exists. In the beginning of the year, it's low. In the summer months, it gets higher because vacations start kicking in. At the end of the year, it gets much
I
lower.
also think winter versus warm weather.
You'd be surprised, December, everybody wants time off, there's a lot of holidays and parties and such, so there's a little bit of an uptick there. But it's, it's something that we watch very closely, because that's a massive responsibility to make sure that stays on course. So, a little bit uncomfortable with the over this year, but in light of the fact that it should match the staffing vacancies that we had, a little bit more comfortable knowing that it should come in right on
Yeah,
track.
we did a lot of recent hires. so for
Yes.
instance,
Filling a lot
Totally
of
Not
holes.
understandable.
You guys, I'm not concerned if you're
No.
not concerned, okay.
No.
Alright, so on page 415 here, we've got longevity, out of title, sick pay, incentive, health stipend. The longevity pay, that goes up by 6%, but the reason for that is that as, staff members increase in time and service, they become entitled to higher levels of longevity, so
It's a contractual,
it's a contractual obligation, but from time to time it goes up based on that.
until people retire.
Yes. Out of title pay is a line that affords for someone to be, again, contractual, that someone has to be in charge at all times. So if I'm on vacation and out of town, or out for any other reason, somebody has to be left in charge, and they've got to be paid out of title pay in accordance with the CBA. So no increase necessary there. Sick pay incentive, that'll get paid out at the end of the year. That's based on how many officers don't use any sick time. There's, again, in the CBA, there's an incentive for not taking sick time, so there's $40,000 budgeted. It depends year over year. We can't really predict ahead of time, but that's tends to be the safe number. Health stipend is for those officers who opt not to take health insurance from here, so those folks are on someone else's health insurance plan.
And what do they get for being on someone else's health, and do we pay them?
$16,753 is what it comes in. It's
I mean,
it's
per
the-
person.
Percentage of the
I should ask you,
premium
what's per
equivalent,
person?
is
It's
it-
33.3% of the premium is what they're
Mhm.
paid for not taking our insurance.
Right.
We would get it
Buyout,
too if
right?
you don't
That's
take
buyout,
insurance, you
no,
should get it. I don't
Well,
know if
that's
you
in
do.
the
I do,
PBA
I
contract.
don't
Yes.
get it, and I don't.
It's not the same for
The CSEA.
CSEA.
No, it's different.
That's,
How
that's,
the PBA
just
is
the
their own
PBA. Yeah,
portion.
yes,
Oh.
it is different. Yes,
That's contractual.
yes. Mhm.
So holiday pay, We budget that based on, you know, we require every person to declare whether they intend to use, again, in accordance with the CBA, whether they use their holidays as time off or whether they choose to get paid for those. So that's another one that we're sort of, you know, we have our number, we're projecting out based on how many people intend not to take the holidays off, and that's where that comes from. Super holiday, just the same. There's 4 super holidays, so that's, New Year's, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Labor Day. Labor Day, because it used to be Memorial Day until someone many years ago figured out there was a parade and we were calling everybody in on triple time overtime, so we swapped that out for Labor Day when there's less events going on.
Can I, before we leave this page, I just wanted to ask, with the health stipend?
Yep.
I mean, that going down is actually not good for us. We would rather pay out more health stipends, because then we're not insuring those people, we're self-insured. That's why we incentivize people, if you can go on your spouses, for example. Do we, and I don't know if this ever comes up, but do we have a requirement that every employee be insured, whether it's by us or otherwise?
I think that's a federal government requirement.
Yeah, they
Okay.
need to be.
But those
Well,
would really be more questions for
No,
personnel, because we
yeah,
don't
I mean,
know.
why is asking Karen then? I mean, it's a federal requirement that we offer them healthcare.
Yes,
Is it a village are people required to have healthcare?
yes.
Okay.
So you have to, if you wanna opt out, well, that's with the federal, it's right now, a federal government requirement that you have healthcare. If you opt out, you have to designate that you're opting out of the healthcare, like we have to record that, and you have to have.
So I think it's, because the way the federal government gets you is they make you pay it out through your taxes.
Yeah, they fine you.
They fine
If
you.
zero that.
Yeah,
But
so,
if the person says, here, I don't want the health insurance, it can be very well that they just don't have health insurance and they just.
As long as we offer it, I mean, it's up to
you
them.
have to offer it, and you have to document, somebody
Yes.
can't just say, we're not taking it, it has to be documented, there has to be a waiver.
Right, given by the federal government. What I'm wondering,
No, by us.
we have to allow them to be uninsured?
No, we have to document that they that we gave them healthcare and they refused it.
I get that. I also wanna make sure that all of our employees are insured, because I don't know, maybe it's a non-issue, I'm not trying to create,
So
regulations
far,
that
to
are
my knowledge,
non-issues?
everybody's insured, and it's sort of a cultural thing that most people take these jobs because they want the insurance.
Yeah, it's
But it
not.
wouldn't be the strangest next battle to fight that people just don't wanna be insured, I don't know why, but
I don't know of any circumstance like that, there are
If it's a
very,
non-issue,
very,
we got
very
plenty of other
limited
things to
number
figure
of
out that
people
are
who do
issues,
not
so.
take advantage of insurance, very low number.
okay.
Zero.
Before we go to the next page, I just had a question about, I know that we've had a language stipend for a long time. I'm glad that particularly the department has been utilizing it. How is it being utilized, and do you see a need to possibly increase that as we look into furthering language access?
So there's $6,000 accounts for 6 people to get a language stipend of $1,000. For whatever reason, and we've had conversations with people that are not receiving it, that are eligible, of how they would go about becoming eligible. In other words, that they have to get certified through Westchester County with an exam. For some reason, there's a few people that don't wanna take the exam. They still continue to speak Spanish, we're getting the benefit, so I think that people should go out and do that. I think that, you know, we can't recruit enough bilingual officers in terms of the need in our community, so, you know, I think that's more of a contract discussion, but I would be in favor of more people getting the stipend if, you know, if it helps us to recruit. If it were unlimited, we certainly, you know, in terms of like if everybody was eligible for it, it certainly would be a heck of a recruiting point to say every single bilingual employee would be eligible for this. If right now we say, hey, you come here, and if someone retires someday, you might get an extra $1,000.
I thought we actually did open that up in the last contract. I thought we lifted
No.
the cap.
Not to my knowledge.
Thought we did.
Which cap, the number?
So
Yeah,
right
but
now it says that
if-
6 people can get
Not
the
the cap,
language
if-
it's
stipend.
the 6, you could say
If
10
30
as well.
of our officers are bilingual in any language and they wanna
I
go
think
get
the discussion-
certified, I thought was we
This is
would
probably
pay.
not the venue for all that, but I think it came up and then it never happened because of some other things.
Can I ask you a question, now you get the stipend only if you take that course?
You have to get
To
certified.
demonstrate.
exam.
for-
So
And then
for
you
instance,
compensate.
most of it goes through Westchester County, but on the occasion that Westchester County doesn't have, like, from my understanding, cause it's been a long time since this came up, we had an officer that spoke Korean at one time, and we've got one that speaks a number of languages, and I don't recall which language he got certified for. They've gone to, Maryknoll and been able to certify through
Right.
some resources there that Westchester County accepts.
Okay.
So I would certainly be in favor of paying more people for special, for special abilities. I don't wanna call them talents, it's not a talent, but for those special resources that they bring, that certainly would be helpful.
But you don't have 6 people doing it now, though.
We should No, but I think, what's that?
It doesn't matter, he doesn't even have six.
There is, that's what we're saying.
Yeah,
He doesn't
Right.
even have,
So there's,
he's
I
not
don't
even
have,
fulfilling what he has.
I'm speaking in terms of future value though, so if, right now, if you were to budget $10,000 for that, or $20,000 from that, and only 5 people are taking it, it doesn't cost you anything more than the $5,000.
Understood.
But if I were to say, we're looking for bilingual officers, and in addition to regular pay, we even offer you a bonus of $1,000 to come and join us, certainly that's there. If I have that one spot, it's awfully risky to go and recruit people saying, and you can get an extra 1,000 and first come, first served.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not in the contract. I would say, please create that problem, we'll find the money.
Okay,
I mean, like, it's
Yeah.
not in the contract, but like, that's something we very much, or
Okay.
this board is very
So-
much supportive of. We're talking about $1,000, not $1 million, like,
Yeah, but it's $1,000 for each officer.
great, there's
Sure.
60
I'm
officers, if
not
30 of them are
arguing-
bilingual,
I'm
10
not
of them take
arguing
the
against
test,
it.
that's fine.
alright.
He's not even filling 10, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
You could-
Exactly,
No, no, no.
exactly, 2
Fine,
more show up
doesn't
and we go over
matter.
the 6,000 to
We have right
8,000,
now
we're
the
fine
ticket
then.
managers.
Okay, so
We
you
have
wanna
5
increase the
ticket
number of
managers, 6
eligible
spots.
slots.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, going back to the sick pay incentive, we budgeted, 40,000.
Yep.
And I understand that's like a safe number. I assume that I'm looking at 20, I don't know, is this,
So that's 28, on the far left is 17 and then 18.
so we haven't broken 30,000.
No, so
In
again,
recent years.
because it's gonna be paid out the end of next year, hard to predict where it's gonna be. We've taken some real efforts to cut back on people's sick time right now, and, I believe that there's gonna be a little bit of a change in the trend. So, I would hate to under budget that.
Okay.
40 had been pretty steady for a very long time, and there had been an uptick in use of sick time over the last few years. I expect that trend to change.
Understood.
So what do you get if you don't take sick time?
If you take no sick days, I believe you get paid for 5 days. If you take, and then it reduces down pro rata based on how many days you take until you get to 0. So if you take 5 sick days and you get 0 pay. So for instance, if you take none, you get 5, you take 1, you get 4, if you take 2, you get 3, and it counts down until you get to 0. And then if you're above that, there's just no benefit, you get the time off.
Did we modify this with the last contract?
No.
Really?
Mhm.
Oh, all these wonderful memories I have of things that we did with the last contract, okay.
Alright, so, working down language segment, so, okay, so getting into, at 201, we get into sort of the meat and potatoes of our budget here. It appears that there's a very large uptick in 201 for our equipment line, it's not really what it, appears to be, so I think we need to go through the detail for this one. $15,000 is our real request for 201, that is our equipment line, and that's the same amount of money that we've requested year over year, long term. What tends to happen is other things that are sort of larger purchases that are one-offs, we add into here, so I'll explain what we've got here. So the $8,000 is gonna be the outlay for our vests, again, with the $4,000 in revenue coming back on the other side. $17,000 for Axon body worn cameras. There's a capital component of this project, what we're looking for in 2020. Okay, so let me explain our body camera program a little bit. We have 61 staff members, right now we own 25 body cams. What that allows us to do is it allows us to send out our 6, 7, 8 cameras at a time, while others are docked in a station charging or uploading video to our cloud. Particularly with the discovery laws that are coming in next year, right now what we have is we have a lieutenant who sits in his office all day long and a very helpful sergeant. And they have to review all of this video, every minute of video that's done they've got to review, and then they've got to categorize, because right now what you have is cameras that are just randomly uploading data to the cloud, and they're only categorized by date and time. So I can tell you that Lieutenant Damiano and Sergeant Donahue are very good at identifying cops by the watch they wear, their tattoos, the sound of their voice, because when you're looking from the chest point of view, that's the only way we have of categorizing whose video that was. The proper way to do this, the way that it was designed to be, is that each officer has their own individual camera assigned to them. They leave it in the dock at the station when they come in and they go on patrol, it goes on. When they're done, they put it back. When the videos are uploaded, they're already categorized as to whose video it was. And that's gonna save us hours of time. What we're trying to do in this project is to reinforce some of our technology infrastructure, and that's gonna come up in software and some computer hardware stuff. What other departments are doing are hiring 2 and 3 extra staff members in order to be able to review all of these things the way we're doing it. It's a much, much more expensive proposition, I think. Also, it's been a wildly successful program with the body cameras in terms of civil litigation, civilian complaints, criminal prosecutions. There's been no downside to these cameras whatsoever, so I'd ask that this be the year that we finally, we've survived saving money on this project for, I think, 6 or 7 years now, and I think the time has come that we should upgrade and have the way it's meant to be, the way it's designed to be used, and have every officer with their own camera. So, to go back now to what this says, $17,000 is the cost of the data storage and the service contract with those cameras. The capital component of it is the purchase of 16 cameras, which would have a number of new features. They're Wi-Fi enabled, and you could get them, you could, but I don't know that we'll have the budget space to do it, that you could make them LTE capable, that you'd actually be able to real-time watch the camera while somebody's on a call. I think that's a little bit over what the needs we have. That's more for the incident, if you're negotiating a hostage thing or something like that, and you want somebody to be able to be monitoring it. In terms of being on call, we have supervisors that do those. But for after-the-fact review, these body cams have been worth their weight in gold. So, sorry,
Where are we at total number of body cams at this point?
right now we have 25, we're looking to buy 61. So the ones that we have now are being phased out, they're no longer going to be supported, so we can't have 25 and then buy the additional. There's a new model out now, and that's what they're going to, so we're looking to replace those. It's time for them to be replaced.
How old are they?
6 years. So in terms of computer equipment,
That's actually
we've
not bad.
so
Yeah.
most
I mean,
of them are
that's-
6 years old. We added some 3 years ago.
We changed from the collar thing to the chest thing, maybe the chest thing's 6 years. It was a collar.
More than 3.
They're 3?
A little more than 3, I think, because I went in the
Oh,
office.
so that's
So
not
it's
bad.
3,
I'm sorry, these cameras
3 and a
are
half,
4.
maybe 4.
The project itself was 6.
Yeah.
That sounds
I mean, these things, I understand they get obsolete, you
Right.
could have told me there were 2 and they were obsolete, and we have to buy new ones, I just, so, which line is this?
So we're
Is it
still
the
on
36?
we're still on 201, so what I was just pointing out was that the $17,000 for that, that's gonna be our annual cost to maintain the body cam project. Right now, I think we're at 12 for the body cams right now. It's gonna go up to 17, and that's gonna account for the additional storage for all of the extra cameras that'll go out.
So I guess I'm just not, so the assorted equipment is 15,000, is that
Yes.
related to the cameras?
No, that's just our equipment.
The ballistic vest, obviously is not,
That
so
gets
that's
added
just
on
the
top.
body worn cameras, just the 17,000, is just the,
It's just for the body worn cameras, and that's
is
gonna
that,
be,
is that the storage or is that the hardware?
that is the storage. The hardware comes as a capital project on the other side.
Which is what? I mean, I'm trying to get a sense
So
of what
you
the
just
whole
need
cost
this,
is.
to be kept in the budget.
I'm sorry.
You do need the $17,000 to be kept in the budget. We thought it,
I mean, let me look
we
and see.
thought it
what we-
might come out if.
No, so the first year is 67,000, I'm sorry, 57?
We've got 40,086.
I know, but you broke that, you took that apart, right? Is that the initial?
That's the number that was on your capital plan.
Okay. So then, no, so that 17,000 can come out, and the 40,886 would cover both the purchase of the cameras and the first year's service.
Okay, so that
Can you show me where that 40,000 is?
Yeah, I'm looking on page,
It's in the capital plan, page
Capital
2
plan,
of 9,
page 2.
if you look at.
Oh, that's a
There's
whole other
tab,
tab,
there's
oh,
a tab
Yeah,
for
that's
capital
the
plan.
capital.
Let's just kind of check
Capital
the
plan.
Total,
ah,
total cost here.
capital plan.
oh, yes, you're right, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought Tom had taken it apart. In the first year, it's 40,866 buys the 61 cameras plus the first year of storage and service. So it's an either or for that one. Well, it's not really an either or. We either go back to the 13,000 in this year on our operating budget, or we purchase the new cameras and we have that increased cost. What you can see on the capital plan there, though, is that then after the first year, it goes to 16,552 in subsequent years.
That's a regular,
And that's our annual contract for the storage.
So, do we pay, would that be considered a capital
That should
expense?
be.
That's
So,
65,
Budget, that becomes.
Sometimes I put these things on as capital because I'm not sure where Tom wants to put them. That's more of a software issue, and that's where we tend to put it on our line in the budget.
so, yeah, so,
So maybe it's
but
the
just this proposed request for, so like this 16,542 for the next, you know, the subsequent 4 years, that's not really a capital project, right?
That would be paid out of operating.
Right, so
Okay.
we
So
can take,
that's why-
we can take that out.
Chief, what budget line would that be in normally?
Usually it's in software.
So you're taking the 17,000 out of the,
So this-
Well,
yeah.
if he gets
Right, so
the
we can
larger
take this-
number, he takes one
Yeah.
number
Yeah.
has to come out.
Okay.
Right, so we can take the 17,000 out of 201.
Right, and then.
Well, should we though? No, I
No,
don't
we
think we
can
should.
keep
I
it
think we
there.
keep the
We can
17 there.
keep it there
We
for the
subtract it
yeah.
from the 40,886, is that 40,886 includes the 17.
The only question I'd ask is in terms of purchasing though, can we do that if it's can we make a project half capital, half operational? So
Because
can
one
we,
is
can we,
maintenance.
because the way they presented their quote, it was, here's the number, we just know that that portion of it's baked into the first year. They didn't give it to us as two separate numbers.
You know, if we were gonna issue a debt to buy the cameras, that should probably not include the, data storage.
Okay, so then we'll ask them to.
That's not really.
So we can
But
keep
it
the
doesn't matter
17
how they
minus-
invoice us, it's how we account.
Okay,
But we weren't gonna issue debt for this, our recommendation was
Okay.
to use general fund balance, so it
Right,
really
right.
doesn't matter, it's still coming out of the general fund.
okay,
So
So
from
I-
a bookkeeping perspective.
I'd rather put the $17,000 software cost
right,
in the software budget line
right.
in your budget, and then in the capital plan, I guess, reduce this down to just the amount of cameras.
So should it stay in 201, can that?
No, because then he says.
I put it in software, I mean, that line's already got an uptick this year that we can talk about in a minute, but,
I don't know what it is.
software is for,
It's on page 7. 553.
This is under
no,
It's
407 says.
553,
Maintenance.
553 is computer software. So we wouldn't have to add 17,000 in there because there's already money in there that accounts for the original Axon.
Oh, software is 553.
So we would need like, on top of the number that's there, an additional 5,000, not an additional 17,000.
So if there's
Okay, so right now in 553,
12,000 is
do
already
you,
accounted.
we probably should skip ahead because this is relevant,
No,
and then we
yeah,
can come back.
tie it all
Okay,
together.
so if
Yeah.
we're talking about putting this in 553, originally our amount requested was 65,000. We've asked for 75,000 next year, and here's the reason. We have to account for off-site storage, we have to have disaster recovery because of the vast amount of data that we've got to now store in order to comply with the discovery laws. We have to deliver
Which
everything,
is a New York State change.
it's a New York State change, it's not enacted by
How
this
long
municipality.
do you have to store? I'm just curious.
There's retention periods changed on, for long, what's the retention period on?
It's based on the MU1, so
Yeah, it's based on the
depends
level of
on
the offense.
content.
So misdemeanor offenses are,
5 years, and felonies are 25 years.
so there's an awful lot of
So you have to
data.
categorize them that way because you have to then
Right,
delete in 5 or 6 years a rolling calendar.
Yeah,
and keep
yeah,
the
you either
other-
have to categorize or treat it all as felony, you know, you have to err on the side of caution, so yeah, we try to categorize so that we can minimize our usage.
and one of the hardest parts is that there's a 15-day disclosure period from arraignment that we've got to deliver everything to the defense, which includes time for the district attorney's office to review it. So essentially what the DA's office is asking from the time of arraignment, if we can get them everything within like 24 hours, that would be great. That's an incredible, I mean, that's months of work right now being done in 24 hours. So we're not optimistic about how this is gonna roll out. I think it's a fine idea. I think that the execution of it is gonna be atrocious. I think that our department is better suited than most in terms of preparation for this. Sergeant Donahue and Lieutenant Damiano have done a fantastic job. They've been one of the models for the district attorney's office on how to make this happen, and incredibly proud of the work that they've done. I mean, they've really, really been great. But this is going to be a major, major issue in terms of how to prosecute cases and being able to get the information to the defense in such a short prescribed time. That said, we're looking for some extra money in order to bolster our cloud storage, so that's where that comes in. In terms of going back to this Axon project, there's $12,000 included in the $65,000 number that was for our old Axon contract, which would be otherwise continuing. So if we were going to upgrade, then I would ask that, we're only gonna need, $5,000 from that $17,000 number to be added into this.
So we can cross out 17.
Cross out
We can
17,000,
subtract it from the capital project, and we
Then
can
we
add
just
5
add
to
$5,000.
550.
and I would ask
So
for
it'd be $80,000.
$80,000 for my
We just
software.
say 20 grand, I mean 12 grand is what we're
Yes.
saying, okay.
Mhm.
So which is-
Total year one is how much?
That's what the capital line shows,
So
so
it'll
it's
be-
40,886.
No, it won't be
Yeah,
that,
plus the data,
cause
Yeah,
we
it's
already
the
have.
same.
We're already
allocated-
spending 12,000 of it, so
We're already
it's,
spending
it's, the difference is
it's about
25,000 or so.
Yeah.
28,000?
20,000.
That's great.
Chief, is
We're
this our
saving
first
money
year
already
buying
by
guns?
doing nothing but changing
I'll
numbers
talk
on
about
a
that in
page.
just one second. So also in 201, hang on a second, flipping back and forth the pages here. So also in 201, there's a request for $10,457 to replace all of our duty weapons. So, here's how this works. When you purchase a firearm for law enforcement, it has to have night sights on it. Essentially, they're glow-in-the-dark sights because otherwise you'd be aimless in the dark. Those night sights have a life of 10 years. The weapons we have now were purchased in 2009, so that time has eclipsed. The cost of purchasing new night sights, plus the labor to put them on, plus the additional range time that we would have to spend to zero those, is more expensive than it is to trade these guns in and purchase new ones. A couple of other things that come with that is we're looking to transition from 40 caliber weapons to 9 millimeter, which would reduce ammo costs. It's based on the FBI seems to go back and forth on this every so many decades, but their recommendation is that 9 millimeter is a more efficient round because people are more accurate with it, there's less kickback. So our firearms people have sat through a number of seminars on that, and they tend to agree with what the firearms lab at the FBI says. So that's what we're looking to transition to, only in a sense that it's time to replace the night sights now anyway, so it's an opportunity to switch from 40 to 9.
you
So what do you do
traded
with all the,
in,
what do you do with all the old ones?
They get traded in. The cost of the weapons is much more than this.
so
but-
you, for the same company you buy from, you trade them in, just like I, with a car.
Correct,
Go
just like a
buy-
car. And then the net cost would be 10,457.
Got it, okay.
And could you tell me where we are
So
with our
that's 60 blocks.
firearms? Sort of, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, and then 17, so that's the.
No. Okay, so in terms of the
Okay,
numbers,
okay.
it's Glock 17 Gen 5 new weapons.
Gotcha,
It's 60 Glock Model 17 Generation 5. So since we were at Generation 2, I believe, when I started here, and small things get upgraded, Glock is, the reason that we choose Glock over, say, Smith & Wesson or CZ or any of the other vendors that are all perfectly fine, there's only like 4 parts to a Glock. There's a very intricate trigger housing that only firearms instructors are permitted to take apart, but most people don't even know how to get to that. There's like a top slide, a receiver, your barrel, and a spring, and that's it. So it's very easy to train on. It's very low maintenance. We spend very little on replacement parts and things breaking on these because through training and through being out in the weather and all kinds of things rust, they break. That's the reason that we choose Glock, is that it's such an easy platform to work on. Requires very little maintenance. Those generational differences are things like being able to add space on a handguard to account for a grip. Some minor, the magazine release is now ambidextrous to accommodate left-handed shooters. There's very little in terms of like flashy technological upgrades on these things, are more of a comfort factor.
And why do you have 60 instead of 61?
That should actually be 61. So, the price accounts for 61.
Oh, the price
The
accounts.
price accounts for 61.
I love this. We keep getting more for our money, and
We're-
we just saved $12,000,
we have
we just got a
never-
free gun, this is great.
Call the vendor. We've never been the ones to try and overblow the budget. So, working our way down to 211, equipment computers, we're asking for an extra $1,000 there. We've got some extra equipment that we need to buy again in order to comply with all of the discovery laws. And like I said, we're looking for these small upgrades in lieu of hiring staff members to do this because I think we're lucky to have fantastic people that are, the Ossining sort of philosophy is going to make it happen, and really great stuff from them, so small increase in that one. Equipment miscellaneous, 7,000 is what it usually is. There's numbers there that have been increased, so the $36,000 we spent this year, that's to account for our, we had to replace our in-house surveillance cameras. That was a $35,000 project, so that's why there's the increased number there. But in most years, 260 is $7,000, so that's what we're asking for.
And we never stay here. That's
Because
such
there's
a
always
point.
things added to it. It's kind of how the 201 line has all those things added to it. We
Yeah.
just don't have any other things added to it this year.
That's fine. I'm not gonna ask you to account for more. Alright.
402 telephone, we have a small uptick there, and the added expense there is going to be for a T1 line that's necessary in order to have our low speeds that'll let us send. We're sending huge video files and other documents to the DA's office on a near constant basis.
Is
So
that gonna increase, or is that consistent with anything?
What's that? The line?
Sending more video files with the
No,
increased
there's
discovery, that's.
way
not
more
changing
videos.
for
So
you.
right now, what happens is typically what evidence we have, we keep. And when it comes time for discovery, the district attorney's office would then ask us for those materials and turn them over to the defense. Now, it has to be turned over immediately. So we weren't uploading all of this video before, so we had a standard data line. We need a T1 line now because now we have to upload all the video evidence. So there's, like I said, a slight increase there to account for the T1 line. Printing and postage, that's the same. So printing and postage is not just stamps, but that's parking tickets, business cards, no parking signs, all of our printing needs.
Just on that, I know that we had an issue with what the tickets said. Are we correcting those and getting those reprinted in this year's upcoming budget? What are the tickets that we had incorrect?
I think
We're
we're
not
talking
talking
about
about
sanitation.
the.
Sanitation?
That was
Different
the
ones?
sanitation tickets.
Okay.
I don't know, was parking
I
tickets
confused it
needing to
then.
be?
No, we rewrote the parking tickets.
Parking tickets
I
have
confused
been
it then.
historically a challenge, but I
No,
don't think that.
we
this
spent
is-
a good
I
amount
think
of
the
time
issue
on
that
it.
you're talking about was
It's
specific to
sanitation.
sanitation,
Sanitation,
it
okay.
wasn't
Alright.
parking.
My fault.
So 406 office supplies miscellaneous, again, that stays flat. That pays for an awful lot of stuff, includes duty ammunition. I don't know why that's in 406, but it's always been there, so that's where we are. 407 office maintenance of office equipment. So that contract pays for our photocopiers and other equipment that we lease in the building. That's much our shredders and things that are much cheaper to lease than it is to purchase them. And again, there's no increase there.
I just also have a point on that. We don't have to go through it with this particular department, but I know in last year's budget, we had a conversation about the amount of vendors that we're using for the leasing of equipment and what determines that and how to streamline that instead of
So-
using so many, I don't think.
We
Are we talking
reduced
about
that line.
For just the police department?
No, I mean, like, that's why I said it may not be for this
So
department,
that
but
will be in Craig's presentation, and we are looking to put everything under one house for leasing of
Cool, okay.
equipment, so.
Professional dues and meetings, so that pays for things like the state chiefs conference. It also pays for various associations, detective association dues and things like that. Vehicle operating expense, you can see we haven't spent all of that money this year. We tend to save that line for the end of the year because you can't always predict when vehicles break. This 410 pays for more of things that go on the vehicle or in the vehicle, not necessarily for body damage and that kind of stuff. But we do save that one for the end of the year because we just don't know what's gonna go wrong. 411 fuel, we leave that one up to Tom. He does his projections on that one, so that one
Fuel
appears
costs
to be
have
going.
decreased, I think.
I did it, yes. I did analysis of diesel, unleaded, and electric.
When I say Tom, I mean Team Tom.
How many electric do we have?
I'm sorry?
How many, you said electric and fuel?
Diesel and unleaded,
Diesel.
yes.
I have
You'll see
neither
that.
electric nor diesel, but we're just talking about the fuel line right now. I think we can probably talk about that when we get to cars since we've got some movement on that.
We will.
Radio repairs, so that accounts for everything from portables to this year we put a new antenna on Mary Knoll, which is hopefully helping us with reception out in the town. We've had some real struggles with that and finding locations where you can put antennas. Also, building out infrastructure for radio is wildly expensive, so it's something that we're sort of annually tinkering with and trying to find ways to get better reception. I think we've made some great progress with that this year. Auxiliary police,
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Cell phones,
Mhm.
is that, when police officers are on their cell phones, is that their cell phones, or do they get cell phones as part of their?
There are a handful of department cell phones, but it tends to be, it's like me, you have one? There's a few command staff that have them, but not every staff member. In
Okay,
fact, so I would say no patrol officers have them, no sergeants have them. I think there's a detective phone, and the captain and I have phones.
Thank you.
Do they need their cell phone to perform the job?
Yeah, usually, but I'm
They're
not
also personal.
looking to purchase 60 cell phones either.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like having a second phone, so if it's not being required, I'm not gonna put it for it. Just
It's-
trying to
it's-
understand
There's a job requirement to have a phone, whether or not they have to use it for work purposes. It's probably a longer conversation offline
Okay.
that we had about that.
the- Got it.
So auxiliary police pays for uniforms, which we typically buy in the end of the year from them, and some training stuff. So for instance, they just went down to Blue Line and did simulator training, along with the CCRB. Car washing and cleaning, that line, tries to keep our cars clean. We've only used about half this year, but we only get billed for that about quarterly. So we're still expecting a third quarter bill and then fourth quarter to tag on, so we're about on pace to fill that line out. Towing, so towing is an interesting line. We're under budget this year. I still think we should leave that line where it is for the simple reason that we can't always predict how many people will leave their cars. What that line pays for is where we have to tow something and it's our responsibility. So if it's a village vehicle and we have to tow it, if the police cars break down and have to be towed, because that does happen from time to time, pays for it. If there's a criminal investigation where we're towing a car, then we pay for those tows. From time to time where
If
we
there is a criminal investigation, you pay for that. 'Cause
we pay for it. Certainly, we do our best to forward all those costs onto the district attorney for reimbursement after a conviction if one exists. It doesn't always work out that way, and restitution tends to go to the victims first and the municipality second, so. But I can tell you the one thing that I really wanted to comment on this, I think that our lieutenants in particular and the sergeants are working really hard on it, that we've gone to great lengths this year to make sure that signage is up even earlier than it was in the past and to do even more messaging so that people move their cars. We've had from time to time where there's say like an emergency that we have to move a car instead of towing it, and we'll tend to pay those costs. That the reduction in that expense this year is largely due to the fact that our staff is doing more to get people moved out of the way so the cars don't have to be towed. And some vehicle maintenance. So in-service training, that pays for all the equipment and such that we need for our training throughout the year. Training schools and education a little bit different, that's all for things we're sending people out to. Contractual, 454, that's our investigative line. Again, we're not looking for increases in any of these. 455 is repairs to vehicle. Now, we're pretty far under on that one this year, and unfortunately the reason for that is that the collisions that we've had have been catastrophic and those vehicles have been totaled rather than repairable. So we didn't spend as much this year, but typically that's the amount that we need in order to keep our fleet up and running.
Do you go to where do you get all the cars repaired?
Where do we get them repaired?
Yeah.
For body, well, so you have to bid most of this work out.
That's
So
what I
for
was
body
getting
work,
to, so
for
it's
body
all
work, we
get
go
bid?
to, I think we usually get 5 quotes for body work, and low bid is, I mean, they're all local businesses. For engine work, a lot of it's done at the barn. Occasionally, we've had to take stuff back to dealers, so we'll go to Pleasantville Ford.
By the barn means the operations center.
Yes.
I thought it was all done at the operations center, actually.
We've
Oil
had a few
changes and
things,
maintenance and stuff.
we've had a few things where it's been
Yeah,
required to
that's
take
good.
it back to
But you
Ford.
have to bid them out, basically, is what
The
you're
body
saying.
work is all bid out, yes.
We never do body work.
Nah, we did none of that, it's a lot. So computer software we discussed, uniform cleaning and uniforms, 555 and 556 are both contractual, so every officer's entitled to an allowance for cleaning uniforms and an amount for the uniforms themselves. So I've also got 3121, and you can see there's a small increase in the 100 line there. That's based on staff members that are moving up in steps, so those are contractual obligations. Likewise, most of their expenses are tied to that. The one thing in here that I'd like to point out is that in 312110, we have crossing guards. Typically, they are granted an increase in pay consistent with what the CSEA gets. So I would only ask that there be some consideration given to those folks, because they work awfully hard in all kinds of weather, and they provide a fantastic service for us. So if that's possible when the time comes, I think they greatly appreciate that.
As,
How many hours did they work?
It depends on the post.
What's the range?
What's the range?
So for instance, if you're looking at South High and Wilton, I think that's a 3 times a day post. So they range anywhere from 2 hours a day to I think 4.5 is the longest per day. I don't remember what the weekly hours are for everybody, but they range from 2 to 4 hours a day.
just help me understand this, and I don't know if this may be a Karen discussion, but, we're looking at CC contract right now. When we're talking about raises, we're talking about overall from where they are today to where they might be next year, if there's a percentage increase. Chief, are you specifically suggesting that there should be an increase to the crossing guard hourly rate?
That's typically what we do.
Outside of what the
CSEA.
CSEA increase would be?
No. What I'm asking is that when the CSEA contract is settled, that there be some, that there be a consistent increase for the crossing guards at that time.
It's not contractually obligated that that would happen.
They don't, they're
They're not
seasonal employees,
CSEA
so they're
because
not,
seasonal employees.
correct,
Okay.
they're not CSEA employees. Typically, when the CSEA contract is in play, so where we're mid-contract, I would normally put in, and it's what's historically been done, it will put in whatever the raise that the CSEA got that year in that line for the budget in order to give those folks a raise and keep them from falling behind.
So, but that hasn't been done here because.
Not in this year because there's no contract right now, so that's what I'm saying, so.
The contract's imminent, so.
So if that, so
But
if it's
there's
decided.
I don't wanna ask what the answer
So
to that
right,
is,
so
but.
if the CSEA contract is decided before December 4th, then we can
It would be
choose
fantastic if
to-
those.
Incorporate it.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to.
We can just do it right now.
We can just do it right now.
So,
Why don't we
I don't
not,
know
why
if
don't
you
we
wanna
have
talk about
Department
that
before we have the
Yeah,
CSEA?
Yeah,
yeah,
let's-
let's wait till the,
We're-
it's gonna be finalized.
we're in the
We can,
process
we can
of
put a mental
contract
note that this number
Well,
might
just
wanna
make
change.
it consistent, because when the last contract was done, you're saying, they did get, I mean, they've been
For,
getting
for
the-
as long as I've been here,
So
they've always
they're
got to
getting
be
it,
consistent with that.
and
I
you
don't
just
know what's
wanna
happened in
remind
those
us.
off years, cause this is my first, year doing a budget where CSEA was out of contract, I think.
So you want us to be consistent.
So that's all, yeah,
They're not
Yeah.
in contract.
That's all right.
well, we're deciding it for the following year.
Okay.
That's what I'm sorry.
I'm just saying, our workers are not out of contract.
They're not out of
That's very important.
So looking at 3122 building, this is a little bit of a hybrid account here. Karen and I kind of share responsibility on this one, where last year I think it is, where we started this program of sort of sharing employees around the village for maintenance of the buildings, and quite frankly, it's worked out fantastic. John Heitman, we get a great service out of him, and he does a fantastic job of coordinating all the maintenance people, and we're thrilled with our maintenance people that are in our building, so.
Excellent.
Glad to see all the good work that they're doing. So again, all of that is sort of just contractual stuff there. There's not a whole lot for us. I would like to point out that our budget for heat, $4,185, I believe is less than what I spend on my house. So I don't know how that is or why that is, but historically the police
Freezing.
department, okay, well,
The uniforms are
Saving
warm.
we're saving money though.
The courtroom is anyway, but.
It is, it's always freezing in there.
Well, that's their own thermostat,
Right,
the court
Jamie?
deals with that.
Well,
I know, Wednesday nights it's
You don't
freezing
put the
in
heat
there.
on, then you
well,
save on
we
heat.
just redid the HVAC system, right?
It's not done yet.
Well, we're going to, so.
Yes.
So
Okay.
it'll get even better.
Well,
So
that upgrade to the HVAC system will provide for better, the issue with the courtroom is that it's a landlocked room, so it's difficult to circulate the air in there and to change temperatures quickly. It takes a long time for them to heat up, and then once they do, they're stuck there. This new system is supposed to address that, but, I'll leave that to Andy and John to talk about, because they're the experts.
Thank you. Alright,
So we've got meals for prisoners, again, we're not looking for a change in that, and that's just based on how many prisoners we have, and at times we feed them, so, hard to say how that's gonna go, so
I
we
feel like
keep
you
that
used to
line
feed
steady.
them a lot from Landmark too.
I was gonna say,
Well,
the
we-
landmark situation.
Landmark was great, Dee Dee's has been almost as helpful, they're very good to us, so we're glad to have local businesses to not only give the business to, but they're supportive of us, and they're very helpful.
Excellent.
So that gets us through, so we've got 3389 is the boat.
No, we're gonna say no.
So we have, you know, other than the fuel, we've got no change in this, but something I just wanted to talk about briefly on the boat. The fire chiefs and I have had some conversation about, I know boats are a hot topic, perennially here. And one of the conversations that the fire chiefs and I have had is about purchasing a boat for shared service. Now, we've been into this conversation for several months, and I know that they put it in their budget for this year. We had a lot of other priorities that took place, and we didn't really have the time to get as deep into the project as we wanted to. I don't know if that's something the board's interested in entertaining this year. It may be more for a 2021 conversation. But if in fact there's any opportunity for a new boat, our boat tends to take on quite a bit of maintenance, and it really is getting older. If there's a boat to be purchased, a shared service would be probably the only way that would make sense from a taxpayer perspective.
And
So-
the fire chiefs think that's a great idea too?
They do. We've already started working on policy for, to correct all of the, you know, look, the conversation about the boat and the fire chiefs and who gets to use it and how really dates back to people that are no longer in office anymore, and I believe it was more about personality conflicts than anything else. I'm more than willing to cooperate with them, and they were optimistic at the conversation that we had, and we're all confident. I mean, they can speak for themselves, but I think that I speak well for the group in saying that I'm completely confident that we can overcome all of the issues that had presented when this has been up in the past. And I think that there's a great resource to be had for the community in having a shared service boat on the river. One of the things I learned, and I'm not an owner of a boat other than the police boat, but I found that fire pumps are extremely expensive, and that's what makes this a difficult project to do. A boat is a lot of money, but the pump is really where we make a difference. That said, look, if you're gonna have firefighting capabilities on the river, and if we're gonna make an investment into protecting the river, it would only make sense to have all of us on it at the same time. So, you know, it's on their capital plan. I'll be glad to come back with them if the board's interested in entertaining that idea. But for right now, I just wanted to bring that up in the context of 3389 because I have a boat now, and that's where I'm at. So,
Sorry, Chief, but we, just please correct me if I'm wrong, but you saying you're not ready right now because of you haven't had that communication and going over of whatever they're required.
well,
they're
here's
asked.
where we're at. We talked about what we need on the boat and what we would want the structure of this program to look like. What we haven't done is we haven't fully spec'd out a boat. I think that before we come and ask for a large amount of money, we should be telling you exactly what it is we're looking for. We also don't have, we haven't had an opportunity because we didn't spec it out to go out and really search into grant opportunities. And I think that there's probably, especially for a shared services thing, there's probably some money to be had for this. So,
Are you looking at shared services with other municipalities? So Croton has like a whole thing going on with boats and the carrier of the boat and
Croton's a little different because they're looking for something that goes on the Croton River, and that's sort of a specific type of craft that wouldn't really be best used on the river, on our river.
they don't have one for the Hudson?
But no, they really spend all their time on the Croton River. You know, in terms of shared among municipalities, that becomes a little bit more complicated, and who's paying for what, who gets what use of things, who's maintaining it. But I'm not aware of any other jurisdiction that shares equipment in that way.
Okay.
But I think to have something, it would be a one-of-a-kind venture, at least in this region. I've not heard of it anywhere else where the police and fire department successfully share
Right.
a boat to protect the river.
So let me ask, the police and what other municipality around this area of the Hudson River has a police boat right now, besides us?
So the county police is fairly active on the Hudson River. They're out most of the year because their boat is capable of doing that. We'd be looking to expand our program a little bit more by getting a boat that would be capable of staying out in the cold weather, or at least a little bit further into the season. For law enforcement purposes though, it's us and then Rockland County Sheriff's, what's that?
So.
Irvington has a boat, it doesn't go out very often.
So only Irvington are not sitting as a village have boats as of now?
To my
Only two
knowledge,
villages?
yes. On this side of the county, on
Yes.
the,
Westchester side.
on the sound side, there's a lot more activity over there.
Peace
So-
Skilpos have one?
I'm sorry?
Peace Skilpos have one?
No, I think Peekskill has a jet ski.
Very cool.
Oh, that sounds fun.
It's rough in March.
I just wanted to add, I thank you for the transparency and just, you know, since it, in letting us know what the cost would be or the whole notion of proposal, because this is the first time that we're hearing of the new conversations or the new possibility. I think that at least I would need a whole presentation as to what those conversations were, and a whole presentation as to the need, and to your point, because the culture and leadership and personnel has changed over the years through this contentious particular ask. I think now is the best time to really understand its need and how to move forward, and also before we can even put it in the budget, really have a good understanding as to what all the options are, what grants would be qualified for, and the board having a clear understanding as to how the police and fire would share.
Right, yeah, that's why I didn't put it in my budget, so, they put it on as, I really see the fire department's budget request as more of a placeholder. I think 2021 is a better time for us to really be able to dive into this and see, how we could get it grant funded and talk about policy issues between us and them to ensure that it's a smooth partnership, so. I did wanna bring that up just in the context of 3389, because, you know, if we're gonna dedicate money to preserving a boat that's out there now, I think it's important for us to look to the future and see how this may transition.
Are you saying that the expense of your boat is high enough that you may need to dock it because it's too expensive to maintain?
I can tell you that things keep breaking on it, and it keeps coming out of the water for extended periods of time. This year, we had to replace engines on it, and we're grateful that the counterterrorism zone funded that. But that there's a finite amount of money that comes through the counterterrorism zone, and if that money's been spent on other things and our engines go down again, which they seem to do from time to time on an older boat.
Chief, how many, Austin police officers are also members of the Austin Fire Department? I'd be interested in knowing
How
the
about
number,
percentage,
if we're
like?
sharing the boat, you know, cause you guys are on duty, and I'm just wondering how likely it is that whoever's on duty and is able to jump down to the boat, you tend to get there faster.
Yeah,
than
there's a whole
on duty,
conversation
so-
about, you know, look, the fire department doesn't wanna feel left out on something, and whenever you have a paid service and a volunteer that are working together, there's going to be some concern about whether the paid service, because you're full-time, is gonna be sort of jumping things and taking, you know, all of the work. You know, the conversations that we had were, look, if there's a fire on the river, we're gonna need firefighters on the boat. If there's a report of a crime on the river, we're going without you. If there's a rescue to be had, first 2 people that get there, the boat's going. So, I don't think it's necessarily a concept, a concern of having hybrid firemen, cops that are working like that's, it's a great idea, and certainly it makes that a softer blow, I think, to some of the people that are concerned about it.
I'm curious,
They
it's something I'd be
recognize.
interested to know as we pursue this, and
Sure.
whether next year is an exploration year, then that would be one of my questions, but you just outlined it in very pretty simple
Yeah.
guidelines on if it's a crime, cops go, if it's a rescue, whoever's available goes, if it's fire.
Yeah, and that is our
Both the
foundation, was
firefighters,
really what the fire chiefs wanted to hear, is that everybody's open to that it's not using someone else's name to get a cool piece of equipment and then not sharing it, so.
And who is the jurisdiction on the water over the, like the north, whatever it's called, that boat that brings everybody over?
The
there?
ferry?
Right.
So
I like to call it a speedboat based on my personal experience, but I guess it's called a ferry technically.
Yeah, so I think the ferry operates under a whole other set of guidelines because of their New York waterways and its MTA, and I.
So you have no jurisdiction
I-
over.
They did a rescue there, though.
I couldn't say I don't have jurisdiction, but I have to get back to you.
Yeah, I'll be just interested. Get a few complaints.
I mean, it's something we can certainly have a conversation
Yeah, but
with
that's,
them about it.
if
It's
you're
sort
gonna
of
do a
the equivalent of
presentation
doing
about a boat
traffic
and
for
all
some
that,
of
I
these
think
buses.
it needs to be added in.
Yeah, it's a big part of our water.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I think we're on our last page in the.
Yep, is animal control. And as far as animal control goes, again, this is, you know, it very much follows in line with the other contractual obligations. It's just that this is one employee broken out because he's got a specific duty. So,
So, it's one employee, and that's become questioned because animals are around all the time, and there may be a need to be able to take a look. You've been part of these ongoing conversations. And, you know, it's unreasonable to expect that one employee never gets sick or goes on vacation. So what are the, do you have a recommendation going forward so that we can consistently address the concerns that come up with, animal control, with having only one
Sure.
employee who's able to respond? Is there a way to have it be more,
we
Some
haven't
backup.
run into any issues in the past, but for, what I would call a one-off incident this year, and I don't wanna go too far into anybody's personal information, but we had a significant incident where there was a protracted absence of our animal control officer. That's an extremely unusual issue. I can tell you that the service that we provide through animal control tends to go well above and beyond what the scope of that job actually is. We're oftentimes responding to things where people really should be obligated to hire either a wildlife expert or an exterminator for things on private property, and yet we still continue to provide those services. I know that the folks that participate in the TNR program were concerned about how that went. You know, that's something that we need to look at because I think there needs to be more oversight in terms of what we're actually paying for. We pay an awful lot of money for TNR and for SPCA fees. So, you know, we've gotten along quite well with our animal control officer being at work. This year was a little bit of an anomaly, I would say. It's certainly not something we hope to ever experience again or expect.
certainly?
If there came a time where he either chose to retire or for other reasons left the profession, I mean, obviously I think that it's a valuable resource and something we'd wanna fill right away. I haven't really seen, it's a lot of training to put people through, and I think that in terms of training cops to cover that responsibility, I think that it would be a major expense, and then you'd be left with a couple of police officers that are available, and we run into the exact same issue when they're not working. If it's something that we wanted to make sure we had as a 24-hour-a-day, 7 days a week resource, we'd have to send a lot of people for training. I think that would be very, very expensive, and I don't know we would necessarily get the return on that investment. Some of the things that we have talked about, though, Karen and I were speaking this morning about looking back on the issue of we have a resident who's concerned about animals that have been struck by vehicles. You know, and there was a concern that we're not looking out for those animals. And I can tell you that our staff right now, if we find a domesticated animal that's been injured or hurt and they have a collar, we reach out to those residents when we find that. In terms of scanning animals, if they're not wearing a collar, it's not something we've done in the past. Certainly, we're asking our staff where possible to do what they can to identify an animal if they can. You know, when animals are struck by vehicles, oftentimes that's not a possibility.
When you go to the scanning farms, I don't know.
So many animals are fitted with a microchip
I'm
under
aware
their
of
skin.
that.
So we have a scanner
Right.
that would scan them, and then it gives you a code, and then you can go online and look up the code and try and find out where that animal belongs.
So it's to call the person who owns
Report
the
the
animal.
owner, yeah.
Okay.
And it's sort of a fluid kind of event, because there's a lot of issues with once you find this animal, what are we doing with it then? Are we now bringing this to someone's house? Are we disposing of the animal as we would otherwise? And it's all gonna seem very insensitive, but, and those are the things that our sergeants deal with on a daily basis, on how to deal with difficult situations on the fly. So,
I'm going to suggest a very bureaucratic answer to that. You need to set up your own policy, so that people who live in this community could at least react and say, we'd like you to do more or less. Or, it's very difficult in an environment with as many thousands of people that we have, X percentage, because people's expectations of what public officials do, I think, are very different than, from person to person. And so when you have situations like that, it isn't so much what you do, which is, I think, wonderful. I mean, everybody in my neighborhood has a pet except for me, so I'm very aware of all of this stuff. Honestly, I think you need to put like you guys did like job descriptions for all of you, you know, like in this book. You need to do something like that regarding, pets.
just keep in mind it was one complaint from one person.
No, I'm very,
So-
and I know the person, I'm very much aware, but I'm not reacting to that, I'm reacting to, you guys, in my opinion, should be doing this level, you're already doing this level. The problem is that you don't have what level you're supposed to, so that at least you can say to people, look, you know, like with a human being, you know what to do if a car hits them, right? You have a system in place, don't you?
Yeah.
You should do the same and say, if this happens, we scan, we return it to the owner, that's our policy. Or we scan and we, I don't know what, but I don't know, but it would make your life easier, and the expectations would be set so that it isn't, unreal. So I'm hearing you now, and I'm thinking, we can't train 7 people to take care of, but maybe other people think we should, but at least if you say we have 1 person full-time, we do this, this, and this, I'm just saying, like, putting things in writing makes it an even playing field. People can certainly then say, well, I think it should be more. My answer would be, are you willing to pay more taxes for that or not? Because
Right.
that would be my question to you. And if it's more than any other community does, that's something we could say to people, that's not a policy. The policy is, what's the formula that you're using?
So it's not, you know, and this is also something that crosses over to the sanitation department and the highway department.
I know.
So we're also, looking into that, most, you know, a lot of our staff are pet owners and pet lovers, so where we can document a policy that, and it even can come from, our office on, because it crosses more than one department of who might find it, and then we can do what we, you know, again, I think right now, where we can, we are informing the people, and where we can, making sure that, the pet is appropriately taken care of. So I don't think this is not really an issue, but I think documenting it and having it out there so people know exactly what we do, because it is
It
handled
gets
in
on,
multiple
and
departments.
mostly like, I couldn't answer the question, and then I have to start calling around, and there isn't real, and I have no question that we go above and beyond. That's not the issue for me, the issue is I don't know what to tell people, and then I will be able to tell people.
And then, you know, we've even talked about having a scanner in the highway department too. They're not tremendously expensive, so, it's possible.
And that would be encourage people to make sure that they get the chips on all their animals, because that would be helpful.
Yeah, there's a couple of details we have to look into, but, I don't think it's not necessary, you know, it's something that we basically have the policy in place, it's just articulating it and making sure our pet lovers are reassured that we do go above and beyond to protect our residents' pets and.
Okay, so capital projects.
Oh, yes, I forgot the whole thing.
So our last thing we'll wrap up is the big stuff. So really only a couple of things on the list this year, although albeit quite large. So this year,
Just a couple.
Well,
Oh, nice, but-
we're looking for 3 marked cars and an unmarked this year, which is 1 car more than we would normally ask for. And that is to account for, as I said before, when we looked at the vehicle repair line, we didn't spend a lot of money in that this year because cars were totaled. So when a police car is involved in an accident and the vehicle is totaled and we don't get it back, there is no opportunity for us to replace that car but for in the budget system. So having lost 2 vehicles to total this year, we're looking for 1 additional car in there. And the 1 unmarked car will replace, our detectives are currently driving a vehicle that's north of 110,000 miles, which for a police car is, that's an artifact. We're amazed that it still starts up every morning, but nonetheless it's still, I'm sorry?
200,000 on mine.
The Crown Vic that, yeah, but in police years, there was, the police cars run in dog years.
Chief Burton car,
It was-
they got
It's a
hands.
classic.
It was Chief Burton's car,
So
then
does an
somebody's
Aston.
car, then detective's car, and now Walker drives it, because he's always got that one. So, so we're looking for 3 marked cars and 1 unmarked, which will get our fleet back up to full. The Axon body cams we discussed, pretty much in depth, so you know about those already. And the last thing on there is our live scan fingerprinting system for $25,000. What that is, as we were talking about before, for fingerprints now, for criminal defendants, everybody has to be fingerprinted with digital prints, not ink prints. The advantage to them is that you send the fingerprints in, you get hit back within usually about an hour, sometimes much faster than that. Historically, if you don't have fingerprints in a rap sheet back, then they can't be set even in the new system. So this keeps us up to speed with that because mail takes much longer than an hour, so people wouldn't have their fingerprints back in time for arraignment. New York State has stopped servicing the equipment that everybody has right now. Every single police department in Westchester County is being required to replace their live scan fingerprint system in order to stay up and running. So that's what that's for.
Any chance the state is paying for any of this?
No.
Oh,
For the unfunded mandates?
Yeah.
They told
They
us
would be
that it
unfunded.
was,
All the great things that they're passing that we can't keep up with.
they told us very good price.
Really?
They told us
From
very
one
good price.
company, I'm sure.
Very good price.
So the, what I don't see on here is anything related to plate readers. And I know we've ordered them in the past. How are they being utilized now, or how are they intending to be utilized?
So right now,
in the
we've
future?
got license plate readers that are on the road for regular patrol, and what they do is they're reading license plates at all times, and it's collecting data, goes to the real-time crime center in Westchester, but it also is alerting us to anybody that's got a suspended license plate, or where the operator may have a suspended driver's license, or if something's stolen, or someone's wanted, all of those kind of things. Right now, I didn't put in for a license plate reader this year because what we saw at the International Convention last week is that Axon, the same company for our body cams, we had looked at them for in-car cameras because I would like to, at some point, put those in play as well. Next year, when their new version of the car camera comes out, every single one of them will be a license plate reader. So rather than spending a whole lot of money on car cameras and then spending a lot of money on license plate readers, if we wait 1 more year, we may have the ability to put car cameras in every car that are also license plate readers at the same time, which hopefully would save us a ton of money and give us a lot more opportunity.
Is that something that will be integrated into a future parking meter system?
Yes, so in terms of parking meters, once we figure out what we're doing with that, the license plate readers will be helpful in doing that too.
And is it already, or will it be connected to our overnight parking tag system?
That's a question for the vendors once we select our software company for it should be. That's the intention is to automate everything.
And I think we do have to consider what we're doing for overnight.
All of the meetings we've had in the past, they've told us that it's all possible. I suspect that next year sometime we'll be back with some code revision for the overnight thing in order to make it possible, because I think that some of our code is, it's overly complicated, and I think some things could be simplified in terms of the overnight parking and some of the waivers and all that stuff, but. all coming down the pipe.
Chief, can I ask you a question in regards to the vehicles and the total two vehicles that we said we had this past year?
Yes.
Was that something that we can recover the money from the insurance? And if that's the case, how much money do we get back from the insurance?
To my knowledge, one of those has been settled, and I believe one is pending litigation, but I believe that we're plaintiffs in that case.
So that will sort of take into account the amount of money that we.
Correct,
spend
so
into
that,
the capital
that's
project
a little bit
will
more of
come
a,
into the
yeah,
fund.
maybe a Stewart question, but, yes, Stewart's taking a lot of action to try and do that. Rika, I just wanted to come back, because your question earlier was about electric and gas. This is the first year, so we'll be going to, these are all hybrid next year?
Once we get to the Fords.
Right.
Yes.
So, so the vehicles we purchased this year are gonna be the last year that Ford is selling gas vehicles. The police cars next year will all be hybrid.
Excellent.
Electric is still not,
Electric is an issue.
it's
for
not
you
ready,
guys.
it's not ready
Yeah,
for patrol.
I know.
But
Although,
hybrid, we're gonna give it a shot. Other people, a couple of jurisdictions got it this year, and, we've sort of been watching what they're doing, but Ford is taking away that as an option. They're not offering
Right.
straight gas power, police car next year.
I
It's all
actually get
hybrid.
a little magazine about all this environmental stuff. The other thing is like all the traffic, that may be a possibility for electric, some of those other ones, but, next year, lots of these companies, depending on federal government changes, are coming up with cars that are over 300 miles on a regular flow they can plug in. I think within a year or so, but you guys plan a year to 2 to 3 in advance, so I'm just
We
putting it
plan-
out there,
so-
but you're already on track.
Yeah, we're
Hybrid's
planning
great.
out ahead of time. I mean, the cost is negligible, and the difference, since it's all they're offering, it's not a huge cost difference.
Right.
In terms of like parking cars and stuff like that, we tend to keep those for an extremely long period of time. So, sure, I think that there may be an option
Understood.
for electric or something later, but we're hoping to really get some squeeze out of those vehicles. They're relatively new.
At some point, can you forward or share, it doesn't have to be today, more from my knowledge and understanding and education, the need for ghost cars, because I've done some research, but I've read a lot of good reasons as to why municipal police departments should have them and all that they help with, and then I've read other subjective content, so, I would like to learn, that.
About what, when you say that?
The need for ghost cars?
We have a car that's low profile lettering, and it's used for traffic enforcement.
Seen it, yeah.
Sure, I'll do some research.
So you use a ghost car for traffic enforcement?
It's used in the sector sometimes also.
Would a plain car do the same thing now, like make people slow down?
Oh, what?
Like having a regular car versus a ghost car, wouldn't it do the same thing? Or once they see your car and that's you,
The goal is for them not to see
Not
it
to see it.
easily.
oh, so to ticket them,
Oh, sorry?
to ticket them?
A what?
To ticket them.
Oh,
is
to
the- is the-
ticket them?
Is the goal for people not to be able to recognize you?
The goal is voluntary compliance.
So what I'm saying is, what's the difference between a ghost car and a regular car?
There's no light bar on top, and the lettering is not as visible.
And does the regular car and the ghost car do the same thing when it comes to traffic enforcement?
I'm not clear on what you mean by do the same thing.
What's the rationale for having a ghost car? Why bother?
Why bother? Because if you sit it in traffic where you're watching things and there's a marked car, sometimes that'll get, one reaction. You may get a different reaction if they don't notice the police car is there, to be able to see things without people. So if you wanna observe what people do when there's not a cop watching, the ghost car can be helpful. Does that answer your question?
I think, the way it was explained to me, and I may be corrected here, the lettering is, you can see it when you're close to it, but not when you drive. It's like white on white, blue on blue, it's hard to see. But it's identifiable, because there are problems around this country when you're in an unidentified car, for the purposes that you would use them, people won't stop because they're afraid. Late at night, like, I don't care, there's a red light behind me, I don't know if that's a real cop, but so they're identified when you're like standing as close as you and I are, but when you're driving by them, you gotta have pretty good eyesight to actually see them, and I think that's the way it was explained to me, of why they use them, whether I agree with it or not. That's the difference of what you're asking, I think, is the answer, but, I'm sure there are studies of why people do that or not. I like the cars to
I
be
would see it a little
identified, but.
differently. I think that when you know, when we know somebody's looking, we change our behavior because we know we're going to have, you know, there's going to be a consequence. The reality when you're speeding, when you're doing breaking traffic violations, it's not just what you're personally doing, like you're putting other people at risk. So for people who do this, you know, that's sort of the way they drive and everything, it's more of a deterrent if you are actually catching people while they're doing it and then they're receiving the consequences, as opposed to they saw somebody, they slowed
brakes.
down and they never received the consequence for the action. So it plays into public safety, I mean, to a degree.
We deal with quite a few traffic complaints here. People that live here and work here are complaining constantly about how traffic is, so we're gonna try everything we can to try and improve traffic safety around here. One of those is to use a combination of 90% fully marked visible vehicles and the occasional entry of a ghost vehicle. We've not always had one in the fleet. We've had one for a number of years now. Maybe something we keep, maybe something we don't. There's certainly no devious purpose to try and fool people. I mean, the laws are the laws, and if you choose not to follow the traffic laws and you get ticketed, I don't know that it matters what kind of car tickets you. It's not entrapment to have a low-profile vehicle.
Okay.
I have a question separate. Any plans in the future for taxi cabs to have cameras in them?
We're, Brendan just got happy. We're looking.
Yeah, I haven't seen you smile for the past, look at so.
But it's
taxi
smiling
cabs
the
and
whole
cameras.
time.
Wow.
That's a really good question.
Okay.
It's actually something we're looking into right now. We've got a couple of different models that we've tried out, and we're looking at options for what's legal in terms of compelling people to have them. We've had one driver so far.
Yeah.
Who's volunteered to put a camera in his car.
Where's the camera aiming?
Taxi cab confessions?
What is the idea?
Forward and backwards.
There's actually,
Nice.
yes, it's
What-
forward and
Where is
backwards.
where's the camera aiming?
It
Out
has
or in?
two lenses, one in each direction.
I just have to tell you that somebody I know has a cab actually reduces his insurance rates dramatically, to have a camera. I
And
mean,
that's
that's why
something
he
that we-
does it, and he owns more than one cab.
Yeah.
It's just not here in our village, so I don't know if where he
No,
is, but it absolutely reduces his insurance, I mean dramatically. to have it.
It's something that Sardani's been working on for quite some time now in terms of how to sort of fit that into the framework. But like I said, we've got it in play right now, and there's one driver
You're
that's
trying it
volunteered
out.
for it. We certainly wouldn't tell anybody that they can't. But there was one in particular that we said, hey, this would be a great thing for you to try out. And I think he's been pretty successful with it so far, right?
No complaints.
But I would ask also, I think if there was an incentive, for example, insurance reduction, that is just another thing, another reason to have it. But I'd be very interested when you're done to hear more about cameras in the taxis.
Version of cash cab.
All right, good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are just 40 minutes in for our lunch.